Hi folks, Dr. P here, and I'm going to talk about history or current events rather than games specifically, but it's my channel. I can do what I want, I guess. And the topic today is, what if Russia tries to use nuclear weapons in the Ukrainian war? Russia has run out of ways to win the Ukraine war. Their new troops, who are untrained or poorly trained, will die in droves or, which is worse, cause experienced troops to die. But worse than that, there's little equipment for them, especially equipment larger than rifles. Rifles and machine guns in World War II did a small fraction of the killing, something like 10%. Artillery was the queen of battle, while other explosives like bombs and mortars and mines and grenades and booby traps did the rest. And Russia doesn't have a stream of that new equipment coming anymore because of sanctions. They can't build it. So they have nothing left as an alternative but nuclear weapons. And we have to remember, if Russia had no nuclear weapons, they would have lost the war by now because NATO would probably have intervened. But as long as Russia has nuclear weapons, countries have to be afraid of them. So look at this from Putin's point of view. He's ruined his country. Everything he's done has gone wrong. He wanted to keep countries out of NATO, and everybody now wants to be in NATO. His country's under sanction, is going to hell economically. Lots and lots of people, often young people, and often the people with the most in the way of marketable skills have left the country. It's just a total disaster. Furthermore, Russian doctrine implies they can use nukes, and the other side may be too scared to act. So they can use nukes, escalate to de-escalate. That's the notion. So daily, the likelihood increases that they're going to use nukes. So what I want to talk about is pure speculation. What are the plans of the USA to respond? Now, I say pure speculation. I've looked this up very briefly, and lots of places will talk that the United States has convened various groups to decide what to do, and that they've conveyed warnings to the Russians about what they're going to do, which they publicly call catastrophic consequences, but nobody says anything about what those actually might be. In any case, uncertainty is most undesirable, so I certainly hope the Americans have laid out specifically what they're going to do. And of course, the Americans could suggest several responses, so the Russians won't know which one the Americans are going to use. Now, Russian officials seem to be in cloud cuckoo land about Russian capabilities, especially when they're losing in Ukraine. They talk about defeating NATO and so on, and they're nuts. Their defense budget is the size of France or Germany or UK alone, and it's dwarfed by the American defense budget. Plus, they've lost an awful lot of material and aircraft and so on. How do they think they're going to manage against the West? So maybe they'll realize they have no prayer against the West in a conventional war, and they're smart enough not to use nukes and see their country entirely destroyed. But you can't be sure. So what would be one possible response if the Russians used nukes? And I'm talking about tactical nukes, low yield nukes. Well, you can't attack Russia with full-scale nukes because that's the road to World War III and everybody dies essentially. So I'm pretty sure there's no plans to respond to attack nukes with nukes of any kind. Of course, if the Russians drop Tsar Bomba on Kiev and kill millions of people, then all bets are off and God knows what would happen, but it's likely to be catastrophic. So what do we do if the Russians use limited nuclear weapons trying to scare us? Well, one option would be wipe out the Russians in Ukraine and the Black Sea, of course. But this would be really hard to arrange. It would have to be American air power, but where would the bases be? You don't send an aircraft carrier into the Black Sea even if the Turks allow it. If you're using planes from farther back, they've got to have permission to fly over Bulgaria or Romania or Turkey. And you can't rely on that permission being given when the balloon goes up. So this is not a wise thing to rely on. You also have to have excellent coordination with the Ukrainians to avoid killing Ukrainians. Further, jet planes will tend to stray over the border into Russia. Ukraine is big, but it's not that big, and jet planes are very fast. Now, anti-air missiles are going to come from Russia. Do we attack the sites? What are the Russians going to do when the planes stray over the border? They're going to shoot at them. It's just a very difficult thing to arrange to wipe out the Russians in Ukraine, even though that would be the most appropriate response. What about an absolute blockade? And by absolute, I mean nobody goes in or out. Everything will be captured or destroyed. We might let Russian submarines back into their ports because they could have nuclear missiles, but who knows? This would have to be done in 4 places: the Baltic, the Black Sea, the far north, Murmansk and so on, and the Pacific. Now, a blockade of the far north is difficult because there's no bases nearby and it's very cold and difficult. And even planes are going to have a hard time, but maybe it could be a submarine blockade and just shoot anything that comes by trying to get in or out. Certainly the American Navy is able to do this, and certainly it would be very bad for Russia because they'd no longer have any commerce to speak of with anybody because most commerce goes by sea. What about precision strikes? We could choose particular targets. If those targets are immobile, we could send precision missiles. The targets could be factories, munitions or otherwise, missile defenses, bridges, who knows? It'd be ways to cripple Russia even further. Now this might be practical, and the important thing here is using missiles rather than airplanes. Airplanes need bases, airplanes have more limited range and so forth. We could wipe out the Russian submarines. Whether Americans are still able to know where all the Russian submarines are these days, I don't know. That used to be the case, but the Russians have built some very silent submarines. Now, how would the Russian submarines react? How would the Russians react to their nuclear missile subs being hunted down? Would they fire their missiles? Or would they just allow themselves to be bumped off without firing their missiles? It strikes me as a poor option because it's too likely to have the Russians firing their missiles. How about wipe out the Russian surface fleet? I like this option because I'm a Navy fan and it would focus US efforts. But other than the Black Sea, how much does it have to do with Ukraine? We've already observed getting to the Black Sea is not easy. Probably the Baltic fleet could hide in St. Petersburg and so on, and we couldn't do much about that. It wouldn't be that easy in the north. Where it'd really be easy is the Pacific. Now, how much of a Russian fleet is there? I don't know. We could tell them we're going to wipe out specific bases. For example, at Vladivostok, which is on the Pacific, or Murmansk, which is up north, St. Petersburg would be too sensitive. So these are naval and air bases primarily, but from the point of view of being connected to where the nukes are being used, it's distant from the fighting. What else could be done? We could designate Russia a terrorist state. That's probably likely. Evidently, this is a bigger deal than most might think. It's pretty extreme, but if they use nukes, then extremities are called for. The blockade sounds like a no-brainer regardless of any other actions. Of course, we could put secondary sanctions on those who trade with Russia. What are India and China going to do against secondary sanctions? Are they going to stop trading with Russia? I think they would. Certainly India. China, who knows? But secondary sanctions, especially against China, would cripple China very rapidly because they depend on outside oil and other energy, and they depend on outside food. They would be in trouble rapidly. What other possibilities do the Russians have than using nukes? Well, They could ruin the nuclear power plant, and that might cause a lot of problems. But it's awfully random, which way is the wind blowing and so on. They could blow up the Dnieper River Dam, and I wouldn't be surprised if they already have explosives attached to it. And when they blow up that dam, there's going to be a tremendous amount of water that's going to drown Kherson and the cities down below the dam. And that would be pretty grim without using nuclear weapons. Now, I'm going to list here some YouTube channels that I find to be particularly useful for this topic. One is from Australia, Perun, which offers detailed analysis of topics, typically an hour. It's a slideshow and the guy's talking over it, but he's really good, and his research is really good. Another one is reporting from Ukraine. It is a Ukrainian. He gives military analysis with the usual map, sometimes another map, but lots of detail about operations that you don't get from the maps, and it's a short format. There's Crooks from the Indian subcontinent, judging from the names of the people involved. They offer several per day, brief text with stock video of very recent events, so it's a way to keep up with what's happening. Anders Puck Nielsen, who is a Dane, offers analysis of larger situations, for example, who blew up the pipelines. And Joe Blogs, I think that's Australian as well, but I'm not sure, offers economic analysis, very well explained with lots of data. Now, as an aside, both Nielsen and Joe think that the Russians blew up the pipeline. There are reasons for that, and they explain very well. Now, what about games? Since this is a games channel, there's lots of room for games about this situation. Maybe a co-op game, maybe a bluffing or push your luck game. Not the kind of game I'm sufficiently interested in, however. I have other ideas for co-op games that are more important than this one. But there are going to be a lot of games out, if some haven't come out already, about this war. Now, what I'd ask listeners is, what other possible retaliation can you suggest? Thanks for listening.